That's a good.
Cool. Recording kicked off. Well, thanks for everyone who's joined. I'm sure we'll get more people pop in as it goes. We normally have that happen. So yes, we've left this on a few weeks later in June. So normally it would be like on the first week, but due to some conflicts and a few other things going on, we're going to have this session now, and then in 2 weeks' time, I'm just confirming we should have another session, and that will be on OneDrive for business deployment on the 7th of July, but I'll confirm that very soon for everyone. And if there's any feedback you have about this being online, not being in person, all that other stuff, yeah, please contact either myself or Andrew or Brett. Would love to hear what you think. And with that, I'll let Andrew take over just to give a little snapshot on what's happening in the world of Microsoft.
Yeah, sure. All right. Well, good to see everyone back again. So from our last meetup, we touched base on the Microsoft 365 May event, headed by the guys over in Melbourne. So all the sessions are now on demand on the Regarding 365 YouTube channel. So I'll add these links to the comments on the meetup group afterwards. And in terms of what's happening, so we've had more updates to Microsoft Teams. We just heard the other day that the 7x7, or the 49 people on the screen at the same time is coming, as well as breakout rooms. So there you are. So presenter. So it was on the education blog that they announced it at the same time. Going to custom backgrounds and meetings, it's now easier to add these background pictures. So it's just a add new button when you go into the background settings. So just there, and that will open up in the usual picture finder, so you can put them all in there as you like. This just went generally available, so you can have Visio diagrams in a tab in Teams, so you can co-author the diagrams at the same time. There you are. And usual click add, give it a name. So last month we had the fully virtual Microsoft Build event on the 19th to the 20th, and all the sessions are on demand now, so you can hit up ak.ms/msbuild. I just click the run button. One of the big announcements during the event was Microsoft Lists. So that's with a capital L. So think of your SharePoint lists, but now they've been upgraded. So they'll get their own app in the 365 suite, and you can create your lists there. You can have a snapshot of all your lists, and these can be created either from there or in Microsoft Teams, and you can continue working on them within Teams or in SharePoint as well.
I'm actually really looking forward to that one. I reckon that's going to be, it's like a simple thing, and it's like half there in SharePoint, but because it's a more standalone-ish, easy access thing, it should replace Excel for a lot of things that just are made of lists and being able to be easily shared and managed. I think it's due to come out end of next month.
So
I heard the end of July. Yeah. So not far off at all.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd be checking that one out, because it could be something that you can roll out really easily with almost no effort and just get easy wins for. Yeah.
And they've got a demo video on that site as well. So
yeah, I reckon that's cool. Cool.
We'll try and get someone to do a talk on it. So coming up next month, we've got the Microsoft Inspire event, 21st, 22nd. So registrations went open last week. So it's a Microsoft partner conference. So they've gone fully virtual as well due to restrictions. It's also free as opposed to all the other in-person events. So more details at ak.ms/msinspire. And just to recap last month's a couple of the items of interest. So Microsoft and Pluralsight still offering their free Azure training and assessment. So jump on that and you probably have to sign up for a new account, but you have access to all the Azure learning content they offer. the Microsoft Cloud Society. So more free online training offered from Microsoft, and you can get a bunch of the links from this site here. So I'll add these to the comments as well afterwards. And the Microsoft Azure Virtual Trading Day events released a few more new dates. So these all booked out very quickly during May and June. So we got some dates that were available when I last checked yesterday. So throughout July and August. So essentially it's a couple of sessions on the day, and at the end they'll give you a voucher for taking the AZ-900 fundamentals exam. So that's all I had, I guess, for this month. So pass it over to David. Hey, Brian.
Good. Thanks, Andrew. I just added a new background to my video. Easy. Didn't know how easy that was. All right, let me share my screen. And you should all be able to see that screen now.
Yep, it's up.
Good. Right.
I should mention, so if anyone does want to interrupt or ask any questions, use the raise your hand. I'll keep an eye on it and jump in to interrupt David if you want to ask any questions.
Yes, please ask questions. If there's anything unclear or if you think I'm talking rubbish, please, which may very well be true, because I don't know everything and not everything I know applies to everybody else. So even though I've seen a lot, always happy to be challenged and have a conversation about different opinions. So please interrupt. It's not about me, it's about you and you getting something out of this. With that, welcome everybody to this session that I called Not Your Other Data Center, with the American version of spelling data center, as I pointed out earlier on. 10 tips for a successful Azure migration. I've done this session a couple of times now in South Africa, in Johannesburg at Ignite, in Sydney for some other user groups, here in Melbourne, and now here virtually in South Australia, Adelaide. If you don't know me, I'm David O'Brien. It's my picture there, or you see me on the video. I'm a Microsoft MVP, Azure MVP, at least for another, 10 days or so? Adam, I think 10 days, right?
Well, first of July, so you only got like 7 days. So
oh yeah,
sticking.
When we all get renewed or not, who knows? I'm a cloud architect. I've been doing cloud, AWS and Azure for almost 8 years now, pretty much full time. Haven't touched anything on premises for at least 5 of those 8 years. Lucky me, maybe, I don't know. And 2 years ago, I started a company called Xyrus, and we focus very much on Azure and security. We're also about to launch a SaaS application to monitor and remediate insecure configurations on Azure. So if you're interested in any of that, please hit me up. You can either use Twitter at David_O'Brien. I'm way too active on Twitter, way too much time spent on there. I've got a blog that you might know, might not know from my System Center times. Still the most popular blog articles are from 2012 and 2013, which always amazes me. And my company's website, xyrus.com.au, we're launching a new version of that tomorrow. All right, let's get started. Why are we here? One, we like the networking, and but why are we here for the session? What I want to achieve with pretty much every one of our customers, we want to make sure that your Azure initiative is successful. Yeah, everything else would be weird, so stating the obvious. But I also want to make sure that your initiative is fun, because when something is fun, people like to do it again. And if something was a terrible experience, then people probably do not want to do it again. For example, my COVID-19 test last week, I thought was interesting, similar to a cloud project. I thought it was interesting, but the nose swab was really, really unpleasant. So not so much fun. So I don't want to do it again. Yeah, very, very contemporary example of something that might be interesting, but not so much fun. So I don't want to do it again. And I want you, as the representative of your company or a team, to be the hero of your company. And it sounds very much blah, the hero of your company, but it does feel, if you've done a really good job and people congratulate you on it, it makes you feel valued, and that's always good. And that's usually how I also start into a project with people. Because, and that's what a lot of people unfortunately forget, projects are made out of people, and people are important. Hence, first tip, first topic is people. We always, or a lot of times, skip over the fact that there are people involved. So first of all, if you start a cloud migration and Azure migration, you need to explain the changes coming up. Yeah, if you don't get people on board with the changes, then it's not going to be successful. Yeah, the tech could be as amazing as it can be. If people don't know why and what's coming, they're not going to use it. Yeah, the whole build and they will come is pretty much rubbish. So you need to explain what is going to happen. And then select internal advocates. Yeah, find heroes outside of your team that can drive the project. And then maybe even bring them into your project. And those people don't even need to be really technical. Yeah, it could be a junior person, a junior admin, or a junior BA, or just somebody who's excited about those changes and keen to learn. Yeah, because with this excitement that somebody, maybe even with a lot of cloud or a good network in a company has, with that excitement, a lot of other people will also be excited about those changes, because excitement is contagious. It's the whole premise of social media. We're all excited, so we're even more excited because we're excited. But then also assign responsibilities. Because if nobody's responsible, nobody's going to do anything. That's the whole rate thingies, responsibility, accountability, informing, and decisions. So the whole responsibilities topic needs to be addressed. Who's responsible for what? And then user training. What do your people already know? What do you already know? And where are your gaps? Everybody has gaps, and that's absolutely fine. It's important to understand where the gaps are and how to address those gaps. So training is super, super important. And we've just had Microsoft gives you free training, including certification vouchers. If you're a Microsoft customer with an SA or an EA agreement with Microsoft, they just throw training at you, and pretty much all of that for free. Pluralsight has massive amounts of training. Just go to MS Learn, Microsoft Learn. There's so much free training, including sandbox environments. You don't even have to sign up to your own Azure subscription with your credit card. You just go to MS Learn and you get a sandbox follow those learning paths and train yourself up. Also, I always tell my customers that's training on the job. Yeah, you can expect a bit of training, that people are interested, and if they're excited and they think it's fun, they will most likely invest time after work. But if you expect somebody to step up into a role that they're not 100% across, that's training on the job. And usually most companies get on board with that. Second is we need to accept that cloud is or moving to the cloud is a mental paradigm shift. It implies that things are going to be different. Because, and I used the topic or the title, not your other data center, because there are stickers around that I very much don't agree with, hence the session, that say Azure is not just another data center, or the cloud is my other data center, or something like that. And the cloud is not a location. It's a way of doing things. And these processes, the way of doing things is different in the cloud. Mainly because on-prem, things are fairly static. And usually in a session like this, a hand goes up and they say, that's not true. We have full automation on our VMware or Hyper-V using System Center, VMM, and Service Manager, and whatever. And that's great. Then you're already doing private cloud very well. But in pretty much all cases, or all other cases, on-prem is fairly static. In the cloud, however, resources and patterns change. We've just the other day seen Microsoft release new virtual machine types that in a lot of cases have the same compute power, or maybe more compute power, but we do see new machines with the same compute power. Let's just pick one, I don't know, 4 gig of RAM, 4 CPUs and 8 gig of RAM. And there are many of them. Microsoft releases a new one by the numbers, they look identical, but then you look at the cost and they're cheaper because over time these things become cheaper. So that's one example of patterns that need to, or resources that are constantly updated, and you need to adapt to that. Because if you don't keep up to date, you will spend more time and more money, and money on patterns that you don't necessarily need to spend money on. One example that I always bring up is a jump box on RDS Gateway. You're all probably very familiar with that. Terminal services, RDS Gateway, remote access into your environment. So people use jump boxes or bastion hosts, or whatever you want to call them. They're fairly expensive, mainly because there's a lot of process around them. It's just a virtual machine, and a virtual machine is quickly deployed, but then you cost money. You doing this thing costs money. You need to patch it, you need to secure it, you need to look after it, people need to respond to issues and outages with it, and all of that costs money. Microsoft, about a year ago, released a service called Azure Bastion, which is essentially that, with a few limitations at that point, but only costs $70 per month. So in most cases, somebody even just spending a few minutes on figuring out how to deploy a patch to an RDS gateway is already more expensive than just using that Azure Bastion service. Let's park that as one example. We're going to come back to that later on. The other thing is, in the cloud, possibilities are pretty much limitless. You can almost do whatever you want. But that's also true for what you can spend. Microsoft, by default, unless you've got a sponsorship subscription, they're not going to block you from spending money, obviously. Which means that if you're not careful, then and you just go and deploy things, you will be billed for those resources. So on-prem, for example, what are the virtual machine types that people usually ask for when they ask for a virtual machine? Probably, just as I mentioned before, 4 CPUs, 8 gigs of RAM. Actually, in Johannesburg, people already told me that's outdated. People ask for at least 4 CPUs and 16 gigs of RAM now, because memory doesn't cost anything. Great. But if you go into the cloud and you deploy that virtual machine, Microsoft is going to charge you by the minute for runtime of that virtual machine. And question then is, do you really need that much power? And that sort of surprises people sometimes, where things suddenly cost money. And that's where this paradigm shift comes in. You need cost monitoring. On premises, not so much a thing, and in the cloud, very much a thing. It's the whole CapEx versus OpEx conversation that people need to have. And cost monitoring on Azure is built in for free, so use it. You can apply budgets to resource groups or subscriptions overall. You can make sure there's monitoring in there. So using that is very, very important. Third one is having a strategy. It seems obvious, but it's one of the first questions that I usually ask, because a good plan is already work half done, right? So first question is, why are you going to the cloud? Why? Yeah. So what's the intent? Why do you feel the need to go to the cloud? Is it a single disconnected workload, something that you're developing and you want to bring into the cloud because there's certain services in there or certain features that you don't get on-prem? Is it hybrid cloud that you're after? Do you want to maybe scale out into the cloud, so burst capabilities into the cloud? Do you want to use certain things? Do you want to keep certain things on premises, like your domain controllers or databases? Or are you going all in? We see data center exits very, very often now, where companies decide, we're done with our data center, we're migrating everything into the cloud. That goes back also to the first topic, making sure that people understand the change that is coming. And then consider a phased migration approach. If you are doing hybrid cloud with migrations or data center exits, obviously not a big bang, because you've not tested anything, so do a phased migration approach. And with that, Azure Migrate, a service that Microsoft offers, has a lot of features to support these phased migrations with assessment phases. They can go and figure out, can certain virtual machines be converted into an app service, for example? What are you going to do with your databases? Can this database, so you point it at an on-premises database, and it will tell you what's the best place to put that database. Same with virtual machine assessments. They can tell you, hey, that virtual machine, depending on the hypervisor you're using, that virtual machine on-prem, that should be this virtual machine type in the cloud. And by the way, we've monitored this virtual machine for a while now. These are the dependencies of that virtual machine. So we've seen network communication going from this virtual machine to other virtual machines or from other virtual machines into this virtual machine, so that you don't go and move this virtual machine, IPs change, or yeah, you break stuff. So Azure Migrate is very important when it comes to these migration projects. Number 4, governance and security is something that we focus a lot on with our customers. And there's no one answer to to every customer, because every customer has different requirements when it comes to governance and security. But first question is, how do you want your teams to use Azure going forward? What are and what are they not allowed to do? Can they go and deploy resources into any region they want? Yeah, or can they go and do that in non-prod or dev test environments, but not in prod? Which services can they use, depending on which regulatory compliance rules you have to follow? There are certain services that have been whitelisted or approved to be PCI compliant, for example. So you can create rules and policies that might block someone from deploying something that's not deemed compliant. Tagging policies, super important, which is essentially metadata that you add to resources to identify who deployed these resources, for example, who's the owner, why has it been deployed, what's the context of this resource. So these are all questions that need to be answered before we go into actually doing things. And then these rules can be leveraged and should be leveraged for auditing. So if somebody tried to deploy something outside of Australia where you said you are not allowed to deploy anything outside of Australia, for example, you can use that event and have a chat to that person and ask, hey, we've seen you tried to deploy something maybe multiple times outside of Australia. Is there maybe a use case that you need to deploy outside of Australia? Because there are valid use cases for that. For example, there's certain services that might be in preview that haven't been deployed into all the Azure regions at that point, but maybe you want to get a bit ahead of a project, or you want to just test something out, see if that new service is actually worth checking out any further. So you just wanted to quickly test it. So it doesn't matter in which region it is, if it's not in Australia. So you can have a conversation with people. Regulatory compliance rules, super important. And even if they don't apply to you, usually at least ISO 27001 is one of the frameworks that people at least want to sort of adhere to. But even if they don't apply to you, it's a really good idea to know about them and know what they say, because really what all of these frameworks say is these are best practices, and by using this framework, we enforce this best practice. That's pretty much all they say. And Security Center, another service baked into Azure, that even can go and look at your environment and say, hey, looking at your environment and comparing that to ISO 27001 or PCI DSS or SOX or HIPAA or FIPS, whatever, we deem your environment to be 70% compliant against that framework. And then you can see what needs to change, what needs to be fixed, etc., to get to a higher score. And people sometimes say, oh, that's nice, that's fancy, but that doesn't actually mean much. Not necessarily true. We've had customers where we deployed PCI, or we were asked to design and deploy a PCI DSS compliant environment and application for them. And we then used the Azure Security Center audits and reports for PCI DSS with their PCI auditors. And they said, actually, that's fine, that's good. And that is even continuously monitored. And that's great. And they got the rubber stamp. It also automatically enforces good practices. All of these rules, enforcing these rules, for example, not allowing storage accounts to not enforce HTTPS. So enforcing HTTPS is obviously a good practice, and you can deploy a policy that says, if you try to deploy a storage account without enforcing HTTPS, I'm not letting you. The big but really is, when it comes to security, and it's always a trade-off, is to not create bottlenecks. So all of these policies, and they're literally Azure policies, it's a service, they can be deployed in either an enforcement mode or an audit mode. And what we usually say, there's a few non-negotiables when it comes to policies, and they're enforced, and everything else initially should really be in audit mode, to have a conversation with people, to understand how they're using it and why they're using Azure in a certain way. Five, know your environment. It sounds obvious, but if you've ever been involved in a migration, any migration or any almost any IT project, you know what I mean. So if you don't know, because if you don't know the initial state of what you're moving, then how are you ever going to control the end state? And so you need to understand which servers are you moving if you're migrating, and what dependencies do they have. And I mentioned Azure Migrate that can help you with those dependencies. For example, if you move one application of a server, will that break another one? I don't think anybody can put their hands up and say, I've never hard-coded any IPs anywhere, or even use the hosts file, because what is DNS? So these are hidden things usually. It's difficult to find them. And Azure Migrate, and there are other tools, but Azure Migrate is baked into the platform. You can use that to identify these dependencies. And Azure Migrate even shows you that in a very nice dependency map, and can say, on that port, that machine tried to contact that other machine. And then you know that, okay, I need to look into why is that machine trying to talk to that, and then figure out, maybe if it's not that obvious, look into host files, look into some hard-coded configuration. And the support question does get less and less, but it's still very much a thing, unfortunately, because it might be that your environment or part of the environment isn't even supported to run on the cloud, or a public cloud, or shared infrastructure in the cloud, which is, for example, why Microsoft Azure now offers dedicated hosts. Yeah, so you can deploy your virtual machines with an application onto a dedicated host, obviously super expensive because Microsoft deploys a host just for you. And but it might get you around some issues where a vendor says, I'm not going to allow you to run my application on shared infrastructure for whatever reason, I've been told Microsoft fixed that, but when it comes to MAC addresses, right, there's software that sometimes licenses by MAC address or other hardware dependent things, and that's just weird and not necessarily a thing that you can always get to work in the cloud. OS versions, really old Windows operating system versions, obviously, that I wouldn't even touch anymore, that even predate my time in IT, which isn't actually that long, 2009, but there's certain versions of operating systems that are just not supported, or officially supported at least. And then right size your servers. Make sure that you keep the cost down. As I said, on-prem, people always ask for a default size and nothing lower than that, nothing less than that. But if you then actually look at the hypervisor metrics at some point, they're all flatline, they're all dead, nothing's actually happening. You might see a bit of a spike in CPU or memory at some point, but really most, if not all, virtual machines on premises are usually way overpowered. And if you just lift and shift, which I always say is just one typo away from a really bad outcome, then you might end up in a situation where you're really spending too much money if you haven't right-sized your virtual machines. I'm not sure if people have read the Maersk transport blog article that popped up 2 days or 3 days ago about Maersk's IAM and PAM, so identity and access management and privileged access management journey, and how they went through the NotPetya hack. Very interesting article. I might be able to put that into the chat later on. It all comes back to make identity a key part of your cloud migration, because that's how you get into your environment. To log into Azure means you go to portal.azure.com, you type in your credentials, and you're in. Obviously, it depends on what sort of permissions you were given, but usually those permissions are too much. Yeah, least privilege is difficult. So a lot of times people just have way too many permissions, and if you don't use MFA, then it's really easy to get into your environment, because all they need is your username, which everybody can guess usually, and your password, which with enough time, pretty much everybody can get into. So use MFA. MFA is not optional. If you work with us, then there's no way we're going to set anything up in the cloud without MFA. And just not optional, it doesn't cost anything. So talking about, I've literally walked out of meetings and customers where they challenged our point to put MFA in. So MFA is absolute a must, a non-negotiable, because you're on the internet and everybody can try to get into your Azure environment. And with MFA, it's at least a bit harder, unless they also get access to that MFA device. AD Connect is, not sure if everybody's across that with Office 365 or Microsoft 365, Azure Active Directory. You can synchronize your on-premises identity up to the cloud. You can synchronize password hashes. For example, if you don't want to, if you want to authenticate in the cloud, you can also do a pass-through authentication down to on-prem if you don't want to synchronize anything up. But having that single sign-on experience is really good and worthwhile investing that, not that much time, but a bit of time into setting AD Connect up. And I mentioned just enough permissions. The stance that we usually take when we work with our customers is, especially in greenfield environments, when we set up a new cloud environment, is that prod subscriptions, production is absolutely just read-only. Nobody has write access to production. The only way to get into production and make changes is via deployment pipelines through infrastructure as code. And that usually sounds very utopian if you've never done that before, but it's absolutely possible, and we've done that with many of our customers. Depending on the customer, is a bit of a journey, but absolutely possible, and just keeps your environment even more secure. Also, keep the number of global administrators to a minimum. It's super easy to just go and say, give me global admin, because people don't necessarily make that connection but what the global administrator actually is, because they are essentially like your domain admins. And I know even the domain admin group on premises is sometimes a bit more crowded than it should be. But unlike on-prem, Microsoft in the cloud actually tells you, I think if you've got more than 8 or 9 global administrators, then there's going to be a banner telling you you've got too many global admins, reduce that number. Because a global administrator can do whatever they want, essentially. They can give themselves access to anything they don't currently have access to. They can take other people's access away from stuff they don't have access to themselves. So these global administrators need to be really, really secure. And with privileged identity management and just the least privileged access principles, you can keep your environment very secure just from an identity point of view. We get a bit more techie in this one. Modernize your environment. And that sometimes comes to a surprise to people when I say, just because you've just migrated or lifted and shifted a virtual machine to Azure, that doesn't mean that it's backed up, more secure, more available, more automated, or cheaper. People do sometimes assume that that just happens automatically. But lifting and shifting without making any changes to a virtual machine or your application can, and in a lot of cases will, make things less secure, less available, less automated, and definitely more expensive. That comes as a surprise to people usually, but there's not much work that needs to be put in to get to a more secure, more available, more automated, and cheaper environment. And that's where something comes in that we usually call a lift and shift, or a contemporary lift and shift, or a modern lift and shift, or a transformation light. People do shy away from the whole transformation, digital transformation, DevOps thing, but really consider just automating the deployment of your infrastructure. If you can't automate the application deployment for whatever reason, or it's just too expensive to get to that point, that's fine, but automate the infrastructure deployment. Make sure that you have a pipeline that can deploy your network security groups, your application security groups, your your virtual machines, your databases, access, etc. Right size, I mentioned that to save money, and then use availability sets, availability zones, virtual machine scale sets. None of those actually cost money. Availability sets, they make sure that if you've got 2 virtual machines sitting there, if you put them into an availability set, they make sure that they don't end up on the same rack. Because even though I said it's not just another data center, the cloud, underneath, obviously, it is a data center with physical hardware, and Microsoft at some point will have to boot their hosts, their racks, have to patch them or they fail. And if you deploy 2 virtual machines, there's a good chance they end up on the same rack or the same host if they are not in an availability set. And if they're single virtual machines, there's not a great SLA on them. I think there's now one on single virtual machines with premium storage at least. But if you're using standard storage on a single virtual machine, Microsoft can turn off the rack or the host, and your virtual machine is gone for the time being until they reboot the host and your virtual machine comes back. Availability sets at least make sure that one of the 2 virtual machines is still up and Microsoft doesn't just take your environment down. Doesn't cost anything, but can only be configured before you deploy the virtual machine or at deployment time of that virtual machine. You can't go and retrospectively apply availability sets to virtual machines. Caught out so many of our customers where they lifted and shifted everything over, and we said you should have really used availability sets, because you also can't see which virtual machines are sharing what physical hardware. So we made them, or they asked us, and we made them deploy those virtual machines again. Availability zones, many different data centers. Physical data centers, you're spreading your virtual machines across them. They're now available in Australia as well. So again, doesn't cost anything except for the compute, the actual compute, the virtual machines. Same with virtual machine scale sets. They can even automatically scale up and down. If there's outages, they automatically come back up. So really apply modern practices. That's really all we're saying. Instead of continuing with old ones. They have worked and do work on-prem. In the cloud, there's so many ways that you can achieve the same outcome cheaper and sometimes even better if you just know about them and follow them. And I always put the 5 R's of cloud migration in here. I think that's a Gartner thing: rehost, refactor, revise, rebuild, and replace. So these are the phases that an application can go through, or how we categorize what is going to happen to a virtual machine or an application, to the point where you could even add retire. So replace can also be retire, where you just turn the virtual machine off. Keep up to date. That sort of comes into or goes into the people aspect. Keep learning. There's so many new things coming out pretty much on a daily basis, and it can be very overwhelming. But just go and implement new features. Shift responsibility from yourself to Microsoft. And I intentionally call it the boring stuff, because unless you're working for a company that provides people with access to RDS gateways, and you literally make money out of deploying RDS gateways for other customers, I don't think anybody actually pays you to deploy RDS gateways. So why are we spending time and money on that, where we could just go and use a managed service, where all of this operational stuff is being taken care of, and we can actually figure out how to automate this, how to automate the process around it, the operational process, how to make all of that nicer so that our people that actually make the money, that are working on the applications, or in support, etc., can do their jobs even better. And that goes into be brave and test things out. In the cloud, it's super easy to just go and deploy something and test the environment completely isolated super quickly. And if it works, great. look at it, write it down, present it to your peers, and maybe implement it. If it doesn't work, delete it and move on. All of that can literally be done in a day. Depending on what it is, maybe half a day. So in a lot of cases, when people come to us during a project, when we're the leads on that project, and say, hey, I was thinking maybe about maybe this, maybe that, I just go and say, do it. Test it out. It's going to take a couple of hours, but do it and come back with your results. If it doesn't work, well, we can tick that off and shelf it. It didn't work, so we don't have to even think about it anymore. Having meetings and meetings and meetings about possible solutions that we could test is so much more expensive than somebody just going and doing it, especially in the cloud. Second last is data, data, and data. Implement a monitoring framework. And I'm probably preaching to the choir, but without monitoring, you obviously have no idea what's happening. The caveat here is implement a monitoring framework that knows about cloud, not just claims that it can do cloud as well. There's the puppy in the background, sorry. That claims that they can do cloud as well, but one that actually knows cloud, and especially Azure. And Azure has a built-in monitoring service, which is free, because Microsoft collects so much data on us, like so much, you wouldn't believe that much data. And they're exposing pretty much all of that for free for 31 days, and you can use it all. And you can then review that data and act on that data. Because if you don't, if you're not collecting that data or looking at that data, then how are you going to make your applications, your environments any better? If you don't know, you don't know. So with reviewing that data, you can figure out, do people even access those virtual machines? Looking at the metrics, you can say, actually, you've way oversized this virtual machine, or maybe you've underpowered it. So we should really look at maybe putting another virtual machine in, or maybe upsizing it. Same with security and governance. There's many, many reports that show you in Azure Active Directory, for example, where are people trying to log in from, successful and failed login attempts to Azure Active Directory. Look at that and react to them. And then if you want to build some nice fancy dashboards, hook all of that data up to Power BI. It's really easy. It's almost hilarious how easy it is to hook Power BI up to all of this monitoring data and then just play with it. I'm not a data guy, and I managed to do it in half an hour. To hook Power BI up to Azure Azure Monitor, and just see all of that data coming in. And the last one, go all in. If you've chosen Azure, which in my opinion, and I might be a bit biased, but I've also done AWS full-time for years, and I think they're also doing a great job. But you've chosen Azure for whatever reason, but now go all in and use it to its fullest. Because if you're not using it to its fullest, then you're not really using the whole security features, the availability features. The whole multi-cloud thing is, in my opinion, something that we're still quite a few years away from. It does come up very often. We need to be able to deploy to AWS and GCP and Azure, and then you ask why, and you just get the same sentence again. We need to be able to, and so on, but never really a reason why. But if you do that, then you won't really notice many or any advantages because you're reducing the clouds to just another data center. And that's where you usually see people just deploying virtual machines, spending way too much money, abstracting things away because a virtual machine on AWS is very different than a virtual machine on Azure, for example, especially once you get down to the actual API layer and try to deploy them automatically. Very different. Even if you're using something like Pulumi for infrastructure as code or Terraform for infrastructure as code, it's one language, but the actual implementation is very, very different. So focus on that one cloud, do that one cloud well. And once you've figured all of that out, and it's not just tech, again, back to point one, it's people. Once everybody's comfortable and you're all pros on Azure, and all of your billing and procurement of cloud and all of that is just chugging along on Azure, then maybe you can look at adding another cloud and pretty much starting all over again, because that other cloud is very different. If you think multi-cloud, actually multi-cloud is also hybrid. Yeah, going hybrid environments for cloud and on-premises. That might be valid. Microsoft makes that quite easy with Azure Stack, where you can even go and deploy the same ARM templates as resource management templates, so infrastructure as code, onto on-premises, onto an on-premises managed rack, basically, and you get the same experience. But overall, hybrid, even with Microsoft, without Azure Stack, is very mature already. With that, I would just like to make you aware of the Cloud Adoption Framework by Microsoft. You can get to that by browsing to aka.ms/CAF. Very, very good resource to read just on basic cloud principles and design principles around identity and security. Pretty much all the things that I just mentioned, just in one space. With that, I'd like to thank everybody who stuck around until 5:30 now and listened to this talk. If you do want to get in touch with me, here's my contact details again. And yeah, thank you very much all for having me, and I'd open up for questions if there are any.
Thanks very much, David. If anyone wants to raise their hand or just jump in and start talking, go ahead. One question I have for you while waiting. Azure Bastion, I was just having a look at that while you were mentioning it as, why spend your time looking after RDS gateways when you can just let Microsoft do it? Does that connect to on-premises servers as well, or is it only purely Azure VMs, or can you have like a site VPN to connect to your on-premises Azure to get to it?
Very good question. It's one of the limitations that I hinted at. So Azure Bastion at this point does not span VNet boundaries, which is a very, very annoying limitation that let's say is going to most likely be fixed soon, as far as I've heard on user voice, etc. Where Azure Bastion is also going to support VNet peering, and at that point, I would expect also to go via VPN or express route.
Yep.
So at this point today, unfortunately, you have to deploy an Azure Bastion resource into every virtual network that you've got, which is quite a big limitation. But once that is gone, you essentially deploy a $70 resource or 70 US, so I think $100 or $100 million, whatever the Australian dollar currently is at, to your central VNet, and you can jump into every peered VNet.
Cool. All right. Thanks for that. Yeah, it's something I hadn't looked at, but until you mentioned it, I was like, yeah, that's a valid point. So yeah, no, I agree with a lot of what you said. It's the whole don't spend the time being a plumber when you can play other taps.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay, so no one's put their hand up, so I'm guessing no one's got any questions. But yeah, you've got David's information on screen. He's on Twitter a lot, just like me. So I'm sure he would be happy for you to reach out on any of those methods.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, thanks everyone for attending. And I had a few people message me saying they wouldn't be able to come. Can they have a recording? So we'll get that
Sure.
sent through in some way. But yeah, thanks very much, David. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely.
And, hopefully we'll get you back in the future for another session.
Sure. All right. Thank you, guys.
Great.
Thank you.
No worries. And hopefully see you on the other side of July as we're both renewed for MVPs.
Fingers crossed.
We'll see. We'll see. Good luck. Thanks very much.
Thank you, David. Much appreciated.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Kevin.
Thank you, indeed.
Thanks, Milton.